Amani had always believed hard work would pay off, until the day it didn't. When the school announced the big award, her name wasn't called, but the real surprise was waiting just around the corner. Hit that like button and let us know what you think in the comments. Now, let's dive into the story. Amani had always been the quiet force behind her school's success. At 17, she was the kind of student teachers dreamed of. Reliable, hardworking, and wise beyond her years. Tall, with skin the color of deep mahogany, her quiet confidence and humble nature made her stand out, though she never sought attention for herself. If there was a school project or a student in need, Amani was there, putting in the effort without asking for recognition. Her peers appreciated her kindness, but they didn't fully understand just how much she did behind the scenes. This year, though, Amani had dared to hope for more. The annual School Achievement Award, given to the student who had demonstrated not just academic success, but leadership and character, was something she had set her sights on. And why shouldn't she? She had been involved in every major event at school, from organizing the charity fundraiser that raised thousands of dollars for the local homeless shelter to tutoring younger students struggling in math. Amani wasn't doing these things for the award, but in the back of her mind, she hoped that maybe this time her efforts would be seen, her hard work acknowledged. It wasn't just about the trophy or the applause, it was about finally feeling like she mattered. For most of her life, Amani had been the girl who worked hard but was often overlooked. She wasn't loud or flashy like some of the more popular students, but she knew she had something valuable to offer. This award felt like her chance to step into the light, to prove, if only to herself, that all her sacrifices were worth it. As the day of the award assembly approached, Amani's anticipation grew. She had tried to keep her hopes in check, but her teachers had dropped hints, her friends whispered encouraging words, and even her mother, who was usually cautious about raising expectations, had said, "I've got a feeling about this one, honey." The morning of the assembly, Amani dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant dress in deep burgundy, her favorite color. She stood in front of the mirror for a long moment, practicing her smile, imagining the moment they would call her name. It would be the first time her whole school saw her, not just as the girl who helped behind the scenes, but as a leader, someone who had truly made a difference. The gymnasium was packed by the time she arrived. Students filled the bleachers, buzzing with excitement. Awards day was always a big deal, and this year the rumors had been swirling about who would win the top honor. Amani took her seat with her friends, her heart pounding in her chest. She was nervous, but it was the good kind of nervous. The kind that comes when you know something amazing is about to happen. As the principal, Mrs. Marshall, stepped up to the microphone, the room hushed. She smiled warmly at the crowd, thanking everyone for their hard work throughout the year, before launching into a speech about the importance of leadership and character. Amani listened intently, her pulse quickening with every word. She was ready for this. She deserved this. And now, Mrs. Marshall said, her voice echoing across the room, the moment you've all been waiting for. The recipient of this year's Achievement Award is a student who has shown exceptional leadership, kindness, and dedication to making our school and community a better place. This student has gone above and beyond, always thinking of others, always willing to lend a hand. We are so proud to honor them today. Amani held her breath. This was it. Her name was about to be called. And the award goes to Charlotte King. For a split second, Amani's brain didn't register the words. Charlotte? It wasn't her name they called. It was Charlotte, the bubbly, popular girl who had led the cheerleading team to state championships and was well-liked by everyone. Charlotte, who had done some good work, sure, but hadn't Amani done more? Hadn't she worked harder, sacrificed more, given more of herself? Amani blinked as Charlotte stood up, beaming, to accept the award. The crowd erupted into applause, students cheering and clapping as if the result had been obvious all along. Amani's hands came together in automatic applause, though her heart felt like it had dropped into her stomach. She smiled, a weak, forced smile, trying to swallow the lump that had formed in her throat. Her friends nudged her, some offering sympathetic glances, but no one said much. What was there to say? The moment she had dreamed of had slipped through her fingers, and now she was just another face in the crowd. As the assembly wrapped up, Amani sat in stunned silence. She should have been happy for Charlotte, she liked her after all, but it was hard to shake the bitter disappointment swirling in her chest. She had worked so hard, given so much, and in the end, it didn't seem to matter. How could it not be enough? When the crowd began to disperse, Amani quietly gathered her things and slipped out of the gym. She couldn't face anyone right now. The chatter of excited students filled the hallways as she made her way to her locker, but she barely heard it. The world felt distant, as if she were watching it all from far away. She knew she should be proud of what she had accomplished this year, but in this moment, all she felt was invisible. That night, Amani sat in her room, staring at the ceiling. The sounds of her family bustling downstairs were muted, and she found herself replaying the events of the day over and over in her mind. Why hadn't they chosen her? What was it that Charlotte had that she didn't? It wasn't that she wanted to win for the sake of winning. It was more than that. It was about being seen, being recognized for everything she had poured her heart into. Her mother knocked softly on the door and peeked in. "You okay, sweetheart?" Amani tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine." Her mother sighed, walking over to sit beside her. "I know it's hard. You worked so hard, and I know you deserve that award. It just feels like, I don't know, like none of it mattered," Amani whispered. Her mother reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It mattered, honey. Just because they didn't call your name doesn't mean all that you did was for nothing. Sometimes it takes a while for people to really see the impact you've made." Amani nodded, though her heart wasn't quite ready to believe it. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe it didn't matter that her name wasn't called. But as she lay in bed that night, Amani couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had been left unfinished, like a story that had started but never found its ending. She had worked so hard to stand out, to make a difference, but now, more than ever, she felt like a star that no one had bothered to notice. The next morning, Amani woke up with a lingering heaviness that clung to her like a shadow. She lay in bed for a moment, hoping the weight would lift, but it stayed there, pressing down on her chest. The excitement she had felt just the day before was now replaced by a sense of emptiness. The achievement award, which she had worked so hard for, had been awarded to someone else. Amani couldn't shake the feeling of having been dismissed, of all her efforts being invisible to the people who mattered. As she finally pulled herself out of bed, she went through the motions of getting ready for school. She dressed quickly, not bothering with her usual care, and skipped breakfast, despite her mother's concerned looks. "You sure you don't want something to eat, honey?" her mom asked from the kitchen as Amani gathered her things. "I'm fine," she replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just not that hungry." Her mother knew better but didn't press the issue. She simply nodded and offered a soft, "Have a good day," as Amani walked out the door. On her way to school, Amani kept her head down, lost in thought. The day before had been such a whirlwind of emotions, and she had barely had time to process it. She remembered the wave of hope that had washed over her as the principal began the announcement for the Achievement Award. For a moment, she was certain they were going to say her name. But instead, it had been Charlotte's. Charlotte King. Blonde, outgoing, bubbly Charlotte. Amani liked her well enough. They were friendly, even if they didn't run in the same circles, but it was hard not to feel a sting of resentment. She couldn't help but compare their contributions. Charlotte was the head of the cheerleading squad, popular and well-liked, but what had she really done that went beyond school spirit? Sure, she had won cheerleading competitions, but Amani had spent countless hours tutoring struggling students, organizing fundraisers, and working to make a real impact on the community. Wasn't that what the award was supposed to be about? Amani knew she shouldn't dwell on it, but it was hard not to. She had poured her heart into this year, sacrificing so much of her free time to make a difference. She had wanted to leave a mark, to prove to herself and to others that she was capable of great things. But now, it felt like none of it mattered. The world had moved on, and she was still stuck, nursing the wound of being overlooked. By the time she reached school, the hallways were buzzing with energy. Students chattered excitedly about the awards assembly, rehashing the winners and losers, but Amani couldn't bring herself to join in the conversation. She made her way to her locker, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact with anyone. The last thing she wanted was to talk about how she felt. As she opened her locker to grab her books, her best friend Sade appeared beside her. "Hey," Sade said softly, her eyes full of sympathy. "How are you doing?" Amani shrugged, trying to keep her tone light. "I'm fine. It's whatever." Sade wasn't buying it. "I know you're disappointed. I would be too if I were you. You deserve that award more than anyone." Amani forced a smile, though the words didn't bring her the comfort she expected. "Thanks, but it's fine. Really. Charlotte deserved it too." "Yeah, but you put in so much work this year. I just don't get why they didn't choose you." Amani shook her head. "It doesn't matter. The decision's been made. There's nothing I can do about it now." Said looked like she wanted to say more, but she held back, sensing that Amani wasn't ready to talk about it. "Well, if you ever want to vent or throw a pity party, I'm here. We can binge-watch bad TV and eat a ton of ice cream. Your choice." Amani let out a small laugh, grateful for Saad's attempt to lighten the mood. "Thanks. I might take you up on that." But even as she joked, the heaviness in her chest remained. It wasn't just about losing the award, it was about the deeper feeling of invisibility. For so long, Amani had been the one who quietly worked in the background, never seeking attention, but always hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice her efforts. The award had felt like her chance to finally be seen, and now that the opportunity had passed, it left her questioning everything. Was she really making a difference? Did any of the work she did even matter, if no one cared enough to acknowledge it? Amani had always believed that hard work would pay off in the end, but now she wasn't so sure. Maybe the world wasn't fair. Maybe it wasn't enough to be kind, to give your all, to try and make things better for others. Maybe people only cared about the flashy things, the popularity, the big wins, the charm. The day dragged on, and Amani moved through it in a daze. She attended her classes, answered questions when called on, and tried her best to focus, but her mind kept wandering back to the same questions. Why wasn't she enough? What more did she have to do to be seen? By lunchtime, Amani was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. She sat with Sade and their group of friends, trying to join in the conversation, but her heart wasn't in it. Every time someone mentioned the awards ceremony, she felt a fresh wave of disappointment. Eventually, she excused herself and headed to the library, seeking the quiet solace of books to escape the noise in her head. As she sat down at a table near the back, Amani pulled out a book, but she didn't open it. Instead, she rested her head on her arms, letting out a slow, shaky breath. She felt tired. Tired of trying so hard and feeling like it wasn't enough. Tired of pretending she wasn't hurt. Tired of waiting for someone to see her for who she really was. Just as she was about to close her eyes, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Amani, can I talk to you for a minute?" She looked up to see Mr. Jacobs, her history teacher, standing beside the table. He was one of the teachers Amani respected the most. He had always been fair, always pushing his students to think critically and challenge themselves. But right now, Amani didn't feel up to talking. "Sure," she said quietly, sitting up. Mr. Jacobs pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. He studied her for a moment, his expression kind but serious. "I've noticed you've been a little off today. I know you were disappointed yesterday." Amani nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I want you to know something," he continued. "Just because you didn't win the award doesn't mean your contributions went unnoticed. I've seen the work you've done, Amani. You've made a real difference in this school and in the lives of the people around you." His words were sincere, and Amani felt a lump form in her throat. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. "It just feels like... I don't know, like it didn't matter." Mr. Jacobs frowned. "It matters. Believe me, it matters. Sometimes the world doesn't give us the recognition we deserve right away. But that doesn't mean what you've done isn't important. I'm proud of you, and so are a lot of other people." Amani looked down at her hands, feeling the sting of tears in her eyes. She had heard similar words from her mother the night before, but hearing them from Mr. Jacobs made it feel more real. Still, the disappointment lingered. I guess I just thought maybe this would be my chance to be seen, she admitted softly. Mr. Jacobs smiled gently. Amani, you've been seen. Maybe not in the way you expected, but the people who matter, the ones whose lives you've touched, they see you. And that's worth more than any award. His words hung in the air between them, and for the first time that day, Amani felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe Mr. Jacobs was right. Maybe there was more to being seen than just receiving a trophy. But even so, the weight of disappointment still rested on her shoulders, and it would take more than a kind word to lift it. Thanks, she said quietly, offering him a small smile. I'll try to remember that. As Mr. Jacobs stood to leave, he gave her a nod. You're doing great, Amani. Don't forget that. Amani watched him walk away, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't sure if she believed him yet, but she wanted to. She wanted to believe that her efforts mattered, even if they weren't always recognized. But for now, the ache of being overlooked still lingered, and Amani wasn't sure how to make it go away. Maybe tomorrow would be better. The days that followed the award ceremony seemed to blur together. Amani fell back into her usual routine, though it lacked the spark she once had. School was no longer a place filled with excitement or opportunities. It was simply a series of classes, assignments, and people she had to interact with. Even her closest friends, like Sade, tiptoed around the topic of the awards, trying not to bring it up, but sensing that Amani wasn't quite herself. Though she tried to move on, the disappointment lingered. She couldn't help but feel a bit hollow, like a part of her had been left unfinished. Every time someone congratulated Charlotte for winning the Achievement Award, it was a subtle reminder that she hadn't been enough. Amani wasn't bitter, but she was still confused. How could her work, which she had poured so much heart into, not be worthy of recognition? One day after school, as Amani was finishing up her last class of the day, history with Mr. Jacobs, she noticed him hanging back after dismissing the rest of the class. Amani gathered her things slowly, expecting to leave when she saw Mr. Jacobs walking toward her desk. Amani, he said with his usual calm voice, can I talk to you for a minute? She nodded, feeling a small knot form in her stomach. Was this going to be another pep talk? Another well-meaning conversation about how her efforts weren't unnoticed, even though she still felt invisible? She wasn't sure if she could handle that today, but she respected Mr. Jacobs, and something in his tone told her this conversation was going to be different. I know the last week or so has been tough, he began, leaning against the edge of her desk. And I know you've probably heard a lot of people telling you how valuable your contributions are. Amani nodded, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Yeah, I mean I get it, but it still feels like it wasn't enough, he finished for her. Amani looked up, startled that he had voiced exactly what she had been struggling with. She nodded slowly. I figured, Mr. Jacobs said, his expression softening, and I wanted to let you know that you've been on our minds, mine and a few other teachers. We've been talking about your work, not just this year, but everything you've done since you started here. You've been consistent, compassionate, and a leader in ways that go beyond school events. Amani furrowed her brow. This wasn't what she expected. Okay, Mr. Jacobs continued, which is why I wanted to share some good news with you. We couldn't say this in the awards ceremony, it wasn't the right time, but there's another opportunity that came up. A few teachers and I put your name forward for something we think is even bigger than the School Achievement Award. Amani blinked, unsure of what to make of this. What do you mean? There's a community leadership program that happens every year, funded by the city. It's highly competitive, and students from all over the region apply for it. They choose a handful of young leaders to be mentored by some of the top professionals and community leaders in the area. It's a pretty big deal. Amani listened, but her mind struggled to keep up with what Mr. Jacobs was saying. This program sounded incredible, but what did it have to do with her? And, Jacobs went on, we've nominated you for it. For a moment, the words didn't register. Amani stared at him, her brain trying to process what he had just said. They nominated her? For something even bigger than the Achievement Award? Her heart began to race, and her fingers tightened around the edge of her desk. You're serious? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Absolutely, Mr. Jacobs said with a proud smile. You deserve it. The work you've done, both in and out of school, is exactly what they're looking for. And Amani, even if you don't win this, the nomination itself is an honor. Only a few students are chosen, and just being nominated puts you in a league of your own. Amani's mind was spinning. This was the last thing she had expected. While she had spent the last week grappling with the disappointment of losing the school award, Jacobs and the other teachers had been thinking about her in a much bigger context. Her heart swelled with a mixture of emotions, disbelief, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of validation. "Wow," she finally breathed, still trying to find the right words. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," Mr. Jacobs said with a chuckle. "Just think about it. There will be a formal letter coming soon with all the details. You'll need to prepare an application and maybe attend an interview. But I wanted to give you a heads up so you weren't blindsided." Amani nodded, still in shock. The ache of disappointment she had carried with her for days began to lift, replaced by something else. Hope. The Achievement Award might have slipped through her fingers, but this opportunity was bigger than she had ever imagined. And the fact that her teachers had nominated her, without her even knowing, made it even more special. They had seen her. They had noticed her hard work all along. As she left Mr. Jacobs's classroom, Amani felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She couldn't stop thinking about what this could mean for her. The community leadership program was prestigious, and being part of it could open doors she hadn't even considered. More than that, though, it was the recognition she had been longing for, not in the form of a trophy, but in the belief others had in her. That evening, Amani shared the news with her mother over dinner. Her mom's reaction was priceless, a mix of shock, pride, and joy. "Amani, that's amazing," her mother exclaimed, practically jumping out of her chair. "I knew your hard work would pay off. I'm so proud of you." Amani smiled, her heart full as she took in her mother's excitement. "It's still sinking in for me," she admitted, "but I think this could be something really good." Her mother reached across the table, squeezing Amani's hand. "It already is. Whether or not you get into the program, this is a huge achievement. You've worked so hard, and now people are seeing just how special you are." Amani felt a lump form in her throat. Her mother's words hit her deeply, but this time, they didn't bring the same uncertainty or doubt she had been feeling before. Instead, they filled her with a quiet confidence. For the first time in days, she believed that maybe her mom and Mr. Jacobs were right. Maybe she didn't need the school award to validate her efforts. Maybe she was making a bigger impact than she had realized. Over the next few days, Amani's world started to shift in subtle but significant ways. Word of her nomination spread quickly around the school, and students who had barely acknowledged her before were suddenly stopping her in the halls to offer congratulations. Even Charlotte, who had won the Achievement Award, approached her after class one day. "Hey, Amani," Charlotte said with a soft smile. "I heard about the community leadership program. That's such a big deal. I just wanted to say congratulations. You really deserve it." Amani blinked, surprised by the sincerity in Charlotte's voice. She had never expected Charlotte to acknowledge her, let alone offer such kind words. It caught her off guard, but in the best possible way. "Thanks, Charlotte," Amani said, her smile genuine this time. "I appreciate that." As Charlotte walked away, Amani felt something shift inside her. The bitterness she had felt toward Charlotte since the award ceremony began to dissolve. Maybe they had been competing for different things all along. Charlotte had earned her award in her own way, and now Amani was being recognized for something that was uniquely hers. That night, as Amani sat in her room, staring at the letter that had finally arrived from the community leadership program, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment. For the first time, it didn't matter that she hadn't won the school's award, because now she knew her worth wasn't defined by one event or one moment of recognition. It was in the small, steady things she had done all year, the lives she had touched, the impact she had made. And that, more than any award, was what mattered most. The days following Amani's nomination for the community leadership program were a whirlwind of emotions, activity, and introspection. The official letter she had received laid out the details of the application process: an extensive interview, a portfolio showcasing her community involvement, and an essay about her goals as a leader. While daunting, it also filled her with a sense of purpose that had been missing ever since the disappointing award ceremony. But more than the logistical side of the nomination, something else had shifted within Amani. As word spread through the school about her nomination, she noticed a change in how people interacted with her. Where she had once felt invisible, now it seemed like her peers were finally seeing her for who she was. On the Monday after the announcement, as she walked into school, students who normally only offered her a passing glance now smiled at her, some even stopping to congratulate her on the nomination. "Congrats on the leadership thing, Amani. That's huge," one girl from her math class called out. Amani barely knew her, but the girl's bright smile seemed sincere, and it gave her a warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. Even the teachers seemed to have a new regard for her. They were always supportive, but now there was something extra in their words, a deeper respect. Mrs. Williamson, her English teacher, pulled her aside after class. "Amani, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am. You've always had such a thoughtful approach to everything you do, and this nomination is so well-deserved." The compliments, while uplifting, were also a little overwhelming. For so long, Amani had worked behind the scenes, quietly doing her part without asking for recognition. Now, with all this attention, she wasn't sure how to handle it. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. There was a part of her that worried this recognition was too little, too late, or that people only cared about her because of the nomination. That internal conflict was on her mind when Sade approached her at lunch, sliding into the seat across from her with a mischievous grin. "So, how's it feel to be famous now?" Amani laughed, shaking her head. "I'm not famous." Sade raised an eyebrow. "Not yet, but give it time. Everyone's talking about you. You're like the new icon of this school. People can't stop mentioning your nomination." Amani sighed. "Yeah, I've noticed. It's kind of weird. I don't really know how to feel about it." Sade tilted her head, frowning slightly. "What do you mean? This is what you've wanted, right? To be seen?" "I guess," Amani said, picking at her food absent-mindedly. "But it's complicated. I've always done this stuff because I care about it, not because I wanted everyone to praise me for it. Now that people are noticing, it feels different. Like maybe I should have been happy being in the background all along." Sade watched her for a moment before responding. "You know, Amani, there's nothing wrong with people recognizing your hard work. You've been doing so much for everyone else for years, and you deserve this. It doesn't make you selfish to accept that people are finally seeing your impact." Amani bit her lip, thinking about Sade's words. Maybe her friend was right. There was a difference between doing good for the sake of it and wanting people to see that good. But the two didn't have to be mutually exclusive. Just because she wanted recognition didn't mean she was doing it for the wrong reasons. "Yeah, I guess I just need to get used to it," Amani said softly. "It's just new." Sade grinned, the mischievous look returning to her face. "Well, you better get used to it quick. There's a rumor going around that Charlotte is throwing you a surprise congrats on your nomination party." Amani's eyes widened. "What? No way. Why would she do that?" Sade shrugged, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "I don't know. Maybe she feels guilty for winning the achievement award. Or maybe she just genuinely thinks you deserve it. Either way, you've made an impression." Amani wasn't sure how to feel about that. The idea of Charlotte throwing her a party seemed far-fetched, but then again, Charlotte had been surprisingly supportive ever since Amani's nomination was announced. Even though they hadn't been particularly close, Charlotte had gone out of her way to congratulate her and say kind words in passing. Maybe the cheerleader wasn't as superficial as Amani had initially assumed. Sure enough, the next day, Amani found a note slipped into her locker. Written in bubbly, loopy handwriting, it read, "Hey Amani, we're planning a small get-together to celebrate your nomination this Friday. It's not a big deal, just some friends hanging out, but we'd love for you to come. You've done so much for this school, and it's time we all showed you some love, Charlotte." Amani stared at the note in disbelief. She had been right. It wasn't just a rumor. Charlotte was actually throwing a party in her honor. The idea of being celebrated like this felt strange, but also kind of nice. After feeling invisible for so long, being the center of attention, even in a positive way, made her a little nervous. But it was also a chance to embrace this new chapter of her life. Friday arrived faster than Amani expected. As she walked into Charlotte's house that evening, she was greeted by a mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces. The small gathering wasn't as intimidating as she had feared. It was mostly a few classmates, some mutual friends, and, of course, Sade. Charlotte had decorated the living room with twinkling lights and a banner that read, "Congrats Amani," in glittering letters. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter and light conversation. Charlotte greeted her with a big smile, offering her a plate of snacks. "I'm so glad you came. I just wanted to do something special to celebrate you. You've done so much for this school, and I feel like people don't give you enough credit for it." Amani smiled, feeling a genuine sense of gratitude toward Charlotte. "Thanks, Charlotte. This is really nice of you. I wasn't expecting any of this." Charlotte shrugged, laughing lightly. "Well, you deserve it. Plus, I've always admired what you've done for everyone. I know I won the award, but honestly, I look up to you. I couldn't have done half of the things you've done for this school." Amani blinked, caught off guard by Charlotte's candidness. The girl who had seemed like the epitome of popularity and success was now admitting that she admired her? It was a strange reversal of roles, but it made Amani realize something important. Recognition wasn't just about awards or praise. Sometimes it was about knowing that your actions had touched someone, even if you didn't see it right away. As the night wore on, Amani found herself relaxing more, enjoying the company and letting go of the insecurities that had weighed her down for so long. Being at the center of this small celebration didn't feel as uncomfortable as she thought it would. In fact, it felt like a moment she had earned, not just through her hard work, but through her perseverance and ability to stay true to herself. At one point during the party, Sade pulled Amani aside. "How are you feeling now? Famous yet?" Amani chuckled, shaking her head. "No, not famous, but I think I'm finally okay with being seen. I used to think I had to choose between being in the background and being recognized, but now I realize it's not one or the other. I can do good things and be proud of them. That's okay, right?" Sade grinned. "Of course it is. You've always been amazing, Amani. Now everyone else is just catching up." For the first time in what felt like forever, Amani let herself believe that. By the time the evening wrapped up and Amani headed home, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The recognition she had received, both from her peers and through the nomination, no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like a gift, one that she had finally learned how to accept. The nomination wasn't just about winning a spot in the community leadership program, though that was certainly exciting. It was about knowing that the people around her did see her, even when she thought they didn't. The weight of disappointment that had followed her after the school award ceremony had finally lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence that she hadn't felt in a long time. As Amani lay in bed that night, reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized that this new kind of recognition wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about being seen for who she truly was, a leader, a friend, and someone who had made a real impact. And that was worth more than any trophy she could ever win. As the weeks passed, Amani's focus shifted from the weight of the disappointment she'd carried to the excitement and preparation for the community leadership program. The process was both thrilling and overwhelming. She spent hours gathering documentation for her portfolio, detailing every project, every tutoring session, and every community initiative she had been part of. It was only when she began laying it all out that she truly realized just how much she had accomplished over the past few years. Each piece of her work told a story, one of quiet leadership, dedication, and selflessness. But now, Amani understood something she hadn't before. It was okay to feel proud of her achievements. She had always believed that the recognition of others didn't define her worth. But now she realized that acknowledging her own efforts didn't make her vain or self-centered. It made her human. One evening, after a long day of preparation, Amani sat at her desk, staring at the essay prompt she had to complete for the leadership program. What drives you to lead, and how do you plan to use your leadership to impact your community? At first, the question seemed daunting. She wasn't sure how to answer in a way that truly captured the essence of who she was. Her leadership style had never been about grand gestures or loud speeches. It had always been about small, consistent acts of kindness and responsibility, things that didn't always get noticed. As she thought more about it, though, Amani realized that this was exactly what made her leadership so valuable. She wasn't leading for recognition or for the spotlight. She was leading because she cared. With this newfound clarity, she began to write, "What drives me to lead is the desire to see others succeed, to make a difference in lives that are often overlooked. For as long as I can remember, I've been the person behind the scenes, making sure that everyone else had what they needed to succeed. Whether it's tutoring younger students, organizing fundraisers, or simply being a listening ear for someone who's struggling, I believe leadership is about service. My journey hasn't been one of awards or public recognition, and that's okay. True leadership, in my experience, is about making a difference quietly, knowing that your work is building a foundation for others to thrive. My goal isn't to be the loudest voice in the room, but to be the one who lifts others up, helping them find their own voices. I plan to use my leadership to continue working within my community, ensuring that everyone, no matter how overlooked, feels seen, valued, and supported. Leadership, to me, is about empowering others to lead themselves." As she typed the final words, Amani felt a wave of peace wash over her. The essay reflected her truth, her quiet strength, and her genuine care for others. It wasn't a flashy answer, but it was real. And that's what mattered. The day of the interview for the Community Leadership Program arrived faster than Amani expected. She had spent weeks preparing for it, rehearsing answers to potential questions, double-checking her portfolio, and even practicing in front of the mirror. But no amount of preparation could ease the butterflies in her stomach as she walked into the large office building where the interviews were being held. Her mother had driven her to the interview that morning, giving her a quiet pep talk on the way. "Just be yourself, honey," she had said, squeezing Amani's hand. "You've already made us so proud. This is just another step in your journey." Amani nodded, but her hand still trembled slightly as she clutched her portfolio. The office was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling city. As she sat in the waiting area, watching the other applicants arrive, some in sharp suits, others with polished resumes in hand, Amani couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. Was she really ready for this? Would they see the value in the work she had done, even if it wasn't as flashy as others? Her thoughts were interrupted when a kind-looking woman approached, clipboard in hand. "Amani, we're ready for you." Taking a deep breath, Amani stood up and followed the woman into a large conference room where a panel of interviewers sat. Their faces were warm and inviting, but Amani could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. This was it. The interview began with the usual questions. "Tell us about yourself. What inspired you to get involved in your community? What does leadership mean to you?" Amani answered each question thoughtfully, drawing from her experiences, but always grounding her answers in the truth of who she was. Someone who led not for recognition, but because she believed in the power of helping others. As the interview progressed, Amani began to relax. The panelists seemed genuinely interested in her answers, nodding and occasionally exchanging glances that made her feel like she was on the right track. But then came the question she had been dreading, the one she had been preparing for but still feared. "Tell us about a time when you felt your efforts weren't recognized and how you dealt with it." Amani paused, her mind immediately flashing back to the School Achievement Award. For a split second, the disappointment she had worked so hard to push past resurfaced. But this time, it didn't overwhelm her. Instead, it gave her a sense of clarity. "There was a time," she began slowly, "when I worked really hard on several school and community projects, and I believed that I might be recognized for my efforts. But I wasn't. At first, it hurt. I questioned whether all the work I had done had really mattered. But then, something changed. I realized that recognition isn't why I do the things I do. The people I helped, the difference I made, that was the real reward." The panelists nodded thoughtfully as she continued. "I learned that leadership isn't about being seen. It's about seeing others and helping them succeed. That's what motivates me. And if I don't get recognized for it, that's okay. The impact is what lasts. The interview ended on a positive note, with the panelists thanking Amani for her thoughtful responses and for sharing her experiences. As she walked out of the room, a sense of calm settled over her. No matter what happened, whether she got into the program or not, she knew she had given it her all. More importantly, she had stayed true to herself. A week later, Amani received the news she had been waiting for. She had been accepted into the community leadership program. The email congratulated her on her selection, noting her unique perspective on leadership and her impressive track record of service. As she read the words, Amani's heart swelled with pride, not just because she had been accepted, but because she had done it by being exactly who she was. The final months of the school year passed quickly, and soon Amani was fully immersed in the leadership program. She met students from all over the city, each with their own story, each bringing something different to the table. The mentorship she received was invaluable, but more than that, she found herself inspired by the diversity of ideas and approaches to leadership. One afternoon, after a particularly insightful seminar, Amani found herself sitting on the steps outside the community center where the program was held. She looked out at the city skyline, reflecting on how far she had come in just a few short months. The disappointment of the school awards ceremony seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. Amani smiled to herself, knowing that her journey was far from over. There were still so many people to help, so many ways to make an impact, and she would do it, quietly, steadily, with the same dedication she had always shown. She didn't need a trophy or public recognition to validate her work. She had already won something far more valuable, the knowledge that she was making a difference, one small act at a time. As she stood up and walked toward the future, Amani carried with her a quiet triumph, a victory not of awards or applause, but of knowing her true worth and the power of her own quiet leadership. And that was all she needed. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch.